Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Testing Psychologist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeremy Sharp, licensed psychologist, group practice owner, and private practice coach. Many of y'all know that I have been using Therapy Notes as our practice EHR for over 10 years now. I've looked at others, and I just keep coming back to Therapy Notes because they do it all. If you're interested in an EHR for your practice, you can get 2 free months of Therapy Notes by going to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. This episode is brought to you by PAR. The new PAR training platform is now available and is the new home for PAR talks, webinars, as well as on-demand learning and product training. Learn more at parinc.com/resources/PAR-training. All right, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. Glad to be here with you as always. And I'm excited to talk with my guests today, Tory Krone and Madeline Larsen. So Tory and Madeline are cousins and co-founders of Practice Vital, a new software startup dedicated to more data-driven group practice management. We love data, right? Tory is a licensed clinical therapist with nearly 15 years of experience as a therapist and in leadership positions in all levels of care. She's also the founder and managing director of a group practice based in Chicago. Madeline recently left her 15-year career in advertising to spearhead Practice Vital's design and marketing efforts. Both of their husbands, Brendan, a technology consultant, and Tom, a software engineer in the startup space, round out Practice Vital's founding team. So there are some really cool aspects to this business, not the least of which is the fact that it's a family business. And we do talk about that during the podcast, what that's like and how it came about within their family. But we talk a lot about Practice Vital and how it can help practices, primarily group practices, could be a small group practice all the way up to a much larger group practice. But we talk about data in general and why it's important to measure data and metrics in our practices. We talk about how to use that data to coach our clinicians, know when to hire, and many more things. And of course, we talk about how Practice Vital can help testing practices specifically. So if you have ever heard anyone recommend that you need to have a dashboard, quote unquote, for your practice, and maybe even you tried to build one, maybe you tried to buy one and implement it, or if you just started to wrap your mind around the concept of tracking, quote unquote, KPIs in your practice, this is absolutely the episode for you. We use Practice Vital in our practice, and it has been a game changer in terms of tracking metrics that are important to us. So I hope that you take a lot away from this conversation. I'll also add that if you do a demo with Practice Vital and sign up, you can use the promo code in the show notes to get $30 off your first month with Practice Vital. So make sure to check that out as well. Now, if you are a practice owner and you would like some support on the business side of things, whether it's growing or scaling or refining your testing practice, I would love to chat with you and perhaps give you some of that support. So you can go to the Testing Psychologist/consulting and sign up for a pre-consulting call to see if it's a good fit. All right, let's go to my conversation with Tory Krone and Madeline Larsen from Practice Vital. Tory, Madeline, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
Hi there.
Hey, yeah, I'm so glad to have y'all. I love software and technology, and anytime I can have a more in-depth conversation with software folks, especially here in our field, that's an exciting moment for me. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking through the software that y'all put together and how it can be helpful for us. But maybe we start just with introductions, as usual when I have multiple folks on, just to give the audience a little opportunity to orient to your voices and who you are. So maybe just introduce yourselves, say who you are and what you do within Practice Vital. Tory, you want to go first?
Sure. Sure. I'm Tory Krone. I am a practice owner in Chicago, and I have a mid-sized practice, and I'm one of the co-founders of Practice Vital.
Right.
Great. And hello, I'm Madeline Larsen. Great to see you, and we're happy to join you today. I am the lead for our marketing and design efforts with Practice Vital. I have a career in marketing and marketing strategy, and have really leaned into the design aspect of this product as we've set forth in the last 6 months or so.
Mm. So does that mean you are responsible for the aesthetic of Practice Vital?
That's correct. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll give you a huge kudos right off the bat because I mean, I think most people are like this, but I feel like I'm particularly keyed into the aesthetics of any software, and it just like captured my attention right away. So nice
Oh,
work.
thank
Yeah,
you. Thank you.
yeah,
I'm a big believer in how design can not only persuade people to lean in, but also help inform and drive a story or a narrative. So I appreciate that, and continue to try to bring that to what we offer to customers in Practice Vital.
yeah. That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Great.
Let's
I don't
see.
think
So
Madeline mentioned that she's a co-founder as well, so probably important to share that.
Yes, yes.
that's important. That's important. Yeah, that might be a good place to start actually, because y'all have maybe somewhat of a unique story, right, with the founding of the company and how all this came about. So maybe we start there. I'd love to share with the audience just how Practice Vital started.
Sure, sure. So it really starts with me and my practice. In 2023, it was just a really rough year. I know a lot of people had a rough time as practice owners in 2023. And I went out on maternity leave. I had my third baby in 5 years. My whole family got COVID 4 months in. There was just a lot going
Oh
on.
gosh.
And I needed to simplify. And it felt a lot like I just can't have this practice run without me. And I thought it would, but the reality was that there just weren't the systems in place. But beyond systems, I think I just didn't have the data to really know how things were going without me there, running it day to day. So I always had a feeling of how things were, but not the data that I needed to know when I was stepping away that things were still running efficiently and that the practice was healthy. And it felt like it was kind of just out of control. Like I didn't know what was happening. I didn't have a grasp on it.
It's a terrible
And I think
feeling.
that, yeah, I think a lot of it was just the empathy that Madeline and Tom, two of our co-founders, had for me. In my experience, they are family members. So it's me, my husband, and the two of them that are all co-founders. And really, it was just over dinner a few different times, and we went on a trip together, and I was lamenting some of these things about my practice. And I think we were all just trying to figure out how to solve the problem for me. Um, and so it really started with my husband and Tom building a dashboard. And I kept hearing about this dashboard concept. I had not had one. I had some Google spreadsheets. They were not very sophisticated. And they just started to build it, and really it took off. It was way beyond what I could have imagined. Partly Tom's background is a software engineer, and he's an MIT grad and just very adept at that. And he had the time. He had just finished a project after about 10 years. And then my husband was in technology and consulting, and was working for Deloitte and then Cisco. And so it was kind of like all our backgrounds are just very synergistic and they really complement each other. So they started to build the dashboard, and then we just realized everybody needs access to this. This is not something that we should be recreating the wheel for every time. It feels like everybody has their own version of a different dashboard. Everybody's building their own, but it's not efficient. There are courses you can take to learn how to build a dashboard, but then it's still in Google Sheets, and it just felt so inefficient. So that's really kind of the origin. And we're pretty recent. We're still within the first year of our company. And it just has felt like there's such a need for this.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, it's remarkable It's remarkable how far it's come along. And, full disclosure, maybe the audience is reading between the lines, but we use Practice Vital in our practice. And yeah, I've just been really struck by how sophisticated it looks, like I alluded to earlier, but also the functionality, is really good. It's really good. And it's impressive that y'all have come that far in such a short period of time. I
Thanks.
am, yeah, yeah. I mean, so this whole family dynamic, family aspect to it is really compelling to me. I also have like a family business off to the side, right? So we're kind of
Yeah.
navigating some of those dynamics. And I'm just curious to look behind the curtain a little bit. Like, can y'all think back to, I don't know what the moment was, but when or who said it, but like how you move from that, hey, this seems like a really great idea to, okay, we're actually like putting money in the bank and we're going to go for it. Can you talk through that process?
I mean, it really was this, Tori mentioned over dinner one afternoon. We had our kids all running around. There's 5 kids amongst the 4 of us. And we just were saying, you know what? Like, there's actually something here. There was this light bulb moment of, okay, wait a second. This is solving a really specific problem for Tori, but just what we're hearing and what she's elaborating on in terms of her colleagues and her Facebook groups and what she's talking about with other people in the industry, it's really something that might actually be worth building into a product and into a company. And we sort of said the words out loud, and then we're like, well, wait a sec, we could really do this. And that's when it started to become really a reality. And it just, like Tori said, the stars aligned in terms of where we all were in our own careers and our life and our families, that it made sense to try something and take this sort of leap of faith together. And with Tori's just incredible industry knowledge and connections, we really were able to put some faith into making a concerted effort as a group to see where that could go. And it's really been astounding and challenging in so many ways, but also really exhilarating for us to wear a lot of hats and try things in a totally different and new way and format working together. And obviously it's a new experience for all of us working with family and friends, but I think we've got such complementary skills and sort of that yin yang of art and science kind of coming together in an interesting way to build a tool that's analytically and mathematically really sound and accurate based on the data that we're extracting from the EHR platforms. But how do you do that in a way that translates to people who aren't necessarily analytical or aren't mathematical in nature and really want to be able to understand and digest this data, but oftentimes don't consider themselves number people and really just want, information that they can find and glean an insight from quickly, but then put that into action in a really meaningful way in their practice instead of, leaning into these spreadsheets upon spreadsheets upon spreadsheets to try to interpret that on a regular basis. So really part of our mission was bringing together that art and science to build something that feels accessible to people, regardless of where your skill sets lie in terms of interpreting data.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, self confession. I think probably like a lot of folks spent, I don't know. I had like one of those business retreats, work retreats, I went away for like a week to work on my business. And I swear I spent 3 solid days trying to build a dashboard. And I'm like pretty tech savvy, like I was going into it, I thought pretty prepared and I could not pull this off. Like it was hard, and it was clunky and it just never ended up working super well. And I'm just validating like this whole demand, I suppose. Like I think a lot of people have maybe had that experience, and this solves pretty important problem or several problems for a lot of us as practice owners.
Sure, yeah. And I think we wanted the clinicians to be able to see their data in a way that's accessible for them as well.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't translate to send them numbers from a spreadsheet. It doesn't feel
Mm,
as real as, and it really is taking the emotion out of it, like the back and forth where clinicians can kind of say, well, that piece of data is because somebody was on vacation or my retention's low because XYZ. I think being able to see their numbers week by week in a way that's aesthetically pleasing and makes sense to them is super useful in terms of being empowering and also motivating to make changes. A lot of times they don't know what they don't know. And so if they don't have access to their own information, how can they make improvements?
right, right. It makes me think of all that research around, like spending money and eating and calorie intake. Like people tend to wildly misestimate both of those things, and we found that that's the same with our practice. Like people, think they have a good idea of how many hours or, how many cancellations or how many, clients are returning, and it's not always accurate, and so being able to measure that is pretty important.
Yeah, we've recently hit on that metaphor a little bit with your wearable health device or your Fitbit, where, it's still a new technology where, you think you're exercising daily or you're getting your steps in, but suddenly when you have that information really readily available, the unlock can be huge, and not in a daunting way, but actually in a really empowering way, where you know a little bit more about what your behavior is on a daily basis to make healthy lifestyle decisions with your wearable. It's the same thing with Practice Vital, where just having access and visibility into something that's running automatically for you, you don't have to do that heavy lift, each time. But since it's kind of humming in the background, you can check in and just feel a little bit more confident, a little bit more empowered in the decisions you're making, and just know that you're comfortable because you have that information readily available. So I think there's definitely some parallels there.
Sure. Yeah, I know we're going to get into the real specifics of the software here pretty quickly, but people like to hear about struggle, right? So I'm going to ask one more sort of personal-ish question. I'm curious, just in this whole startup phase, like over the last year or so, what one of or two of the most challenging moments have been, as y'all are bringing this to market and trying to get it out to as many people as possible.
I'll take a crack at that. I think, I kind of alluded to it earlier. It's that art and science coming together. And so much of that is trying to bridge the world of analytical thinking and software and technical creation process with the world that Tory, and I come from, which is much more of that artistic, emotionally based experience. And how do you, as a group of four, communicate and work together and solve problems, effectively bridging those worlds. So I think it's been both the opportunity, but also the challenge is finding ways to really break ground with those two worlds coming together and find solutions as a team.
That's fair. Yeah, Tori, you add anything to that, or you're like, nope, that's exactly
Oh,
right.
yeah. I mean, I'm just laughing because that's really the biggest thing that comes up for us. And I think, to your point earlier about working with family or your question about it, I think it's really reassuring and comforting to work with family because you know that even if you run into these challenges, that you are stuck with each other and that like you're going to keep being family and you're still going to respect each other at the end of the day and be close. And so we've had to learn how to work around each other's work styles and just personalities. But yeah, I mean, the way that Tom works is so different from the way I work, and we both acknowledge that. And we have all these systems. I mean, I had no idea what it took to begin a technology startup. I mean, it is like just so much more work and it's so much more complicated than I could have ever imagined. And we've got all kinds of software to even manage our projects and our kind of pipeline of what work we're doing, and then putting in feature requests and trying to validate whether that makes sense. And the way that we go about that is just very different. I want to have a discussion because I'm a relational person. And so I'm like, let's just jump on and have a chat about what we should build next. And like for Tom and Brendan, it's very much, no, we need to do it based on what the product what it's becoming based on people's feedback, and we need to have a very systematic process around that. So yeah, we've just I think we balance each other well.
Right. Yeah, I don't know about y'all. I mean, we have a joke. My wife is also a therapist, and so we're friends with a lot of therapists and psychologists, here in the area. But we have this joke. There is that like stereotypical partnership of therapist and engineer, and that seems like super common in our friend
Yeah.
group and among other mental health folks that I know. And this is just a thing that you work through. I feel like this is kind of like classic. I don't know if you'd call it disagreement or maybe just friction, that we
Yeah.
work through in this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and I'm a couples therapist, and I think in some ways working with my husband, some people are like, I could never do that, but I think it's almost brought us closer in certain ways because we have so much content all the time. And I know what he's doing day to day and he knows what I'm doing versus in the past, we'd get to dinner and it would be like, how'd you spend your day? And it was too cumbersome to try and really fill each other in.
Right.
So
Right.
it's kind of nice. I mean, we're never not working now. I think that's the problem is, you bring your laptop to dinner and then after dinner, our kids go to bed and we're back at it trying to solve the next issue. But it's been fun too.
Yeah. 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 No, I appreciate you diving into some of that. Like I said, it's very relatable. Our family business is also a software business. And so all these things and just nodding and agreeing.
I mean, one
So,
more thing I'll add is as a challenge is every practice does things differently. And it's, you'd imagine that. And there are some things we all want to know cancellation data, but the way we all code cancellations is very different. And we all want retention data, but some practices want to track 7 sessions as retained, and some want to track more. And so every day we have requests for minor changes and we want to make it work for every practice. So then we'll kind of tweak one thing, but then it might change something for someone else. And so we're trying to always figure out what's in the best interest of the most people and how can we also be the leaders in establishing the industry norms and the standards and then set criteria that work for the practices and kind of streamline it for the most number of people. So that's a big challenge for us.
I believe it. I don't know if you've run into this, but we have had to cross that bridge. We're really wrestling with this decision of, how much do we kind of not quote unquote dictate what people should do, but sort of set the tone or provide guidance versus just, following our customers' leads, right? And we found that a lot of folks actually want more guidance than we would have expected. There's a lot of ambiguity about how to do a lot of things in our field.
Totally. And that's a big part of our mission too, is to everybody says they want the data, but then it's how do I use the data? And that's been the number one question. I do a coaching call with everyone after we onboard, as I did with you all. And the first question almost everybody asks is, okay, now we have the data. This is awesome. What do I do with it? And it's interesting because you'd think everyone knows, but I think everyone also wants to know what is everyone else doing with it? And we've come across so many additional ways to use the data now from our customers. And so I think that's been fun too, is now we can educate more people and give more of that information based on what our customers have been telling us.
Right. Yeah. It's like by doing the work and talking with all these folks, it's furthering your business. Yeah, it's fantastic. So, I mean, we've dipped into the functionality of Practice Vital here a few times now, but let me zoom out real quick. I mean, I talked in the intro about what y'all do and what the software does, but I would love to just hear from y'all, how would you describe this to someone who may be interested? Let's take a break to hear from a featured partner. Y'all know that I love therapy notes, but I am not the only one. They have a 4.9 out of 5-star rating on trustpilot.com and Google, which makes them the number 1 rated electronic health record system available for mental health folks today. They make billing, scheduling, note-taking, and telehealth all incredibly easy. They also offer custom forms that you can send through the portal. For all the prescribers out there, Therapy Notes is proudly offering e-prescribe as well. And maybe the most important thing for me is that they have live telephone support 7 days a week, so you can actually talk to a real person in a timely manner. If you're trying to switch from another EHR, the transition is incredibly easy. They'll import your demographic data free of charge, so you can get going right away. So if you're curious, or you want to switch, or you need a new EHR, try Therapy Notes for 2 months, absolutely free. You can go to thetestingpsychologist.com/therapy notes and enter the code TESTING. Again, totally free, no strings attached. Check it out and see why everyone is switching to Therapy Notes. Let's take a break to hear from our featured partner. I'm excited to tell you about PAR's all-new PAR training platform, an elevated online learning environment with everything you need in one place. This is the new home for PAR Talks webinars, many of which offer APA and NASP-approved CEs, and also houses on-demand learning tools and PAR product training resources. Best of all, it is free. Totally free. To learn more, visit parinc.com/resources/PAR-training. All right, let's get back to the podcast.
Sure. So we're proud to say we believe it's the first ever fully automated dashboard experience that's pulling in your data from your EHR and displaying and articulating the key performance indicators or metrics that are most valuable for your practice to make everyday decisions, right? So if you will, you'll see within the platform an overview slide for each of your clinicians and those key performance indicators that help to make informed decisions about their performance and whether or not you need to take on more clinicians, perhaps make different compensation decisions, and so forth. And we feel like, first and foremost, this tool can be a coaching companion for how you manage your team and clinicians in terms of sitting down with them on a regular basis, or as Tory said, share those via email, even to help people feel clarity, transparency, and really accountability to what you as a full practice are orienting around in terms of goals. So just to get a bit more specific, some of the key metrics that we're tracking are how many active clients do you have? What is the average weekly session that you're currently operating against, and how does that compare to your goal for what you're setting forth within your expectations for the practice? What is your retention rate and your churn rate? Churn is something we're defining as, how often are your intakes not making it past that fourth session, right? Are you churning through intakes a little bit more frequently? And then cancel rate, as Tory also mentioned, that's another core one that's built into the tool to understand at what rate are we seeing cancellations come through, and specifically those that are non-billable that you might be losing revenue against. And we've really tried to offer a nice breadth, but also depth within the tool. So you can kind of see at first blush what the overall metrics look like, but then dive into a bit more of a nuanced take if you want to dissect that by a certain time frame or a certain interval, or see all of your clinicians lined up side by side comparatively to one another over the course of time. You can kind of play around with a few of our report features to see more of that big picture view.
Yeah. This is great. I mean, the numbers that y'all are pulling, at least in my experience, like these are numbers that might exist somewhere in the EHR, but it's very hard to access and kind of clunky, or like you're exporting spreadsheets and then running some kind of macro to it. Like it's hard, right? It's hard to find a lot of this data, and the automated part is so attractive we just get it easily.
For sure.
And
it
looks
I was
great.
talking to a practice owner this morning for a demo, and she was saying that they spend 10 hours a month tracking retention and trying to figure it out. And, and then they get stuck with, well, if it's 7 or 8 sessions, then do we stop counting 2 months before? And, and that's what we run into too, is building the software. But now that we've got it, we just do that automatically for you. So there's no more trying to calculate those numbers.
Right.
And all of the EHRs really fall short in terms of their reporting. It's just not, and now I get why, because there is so much customization, and our tool customizes a lot of the data for each practice, including, tracking units now for testing, which is like largely because of you, Dr. Jeremy. So being able to do that is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I know people are listening and they're probably thinking, well, my clinicians, we don't really deal with churn rate necessarily if you're just doing testing in the practice. And I get that. I think that the folks out there, certainly anyone who's running a practice with therapists, it's a no-brainer. All the metrics that you just mentioned, like these are the things that we're concerned with. It's like, how often are people counseling, and are clinicians reaching their weekly hours, and are we churning through intakes too fast? All those things. These are all like very important therapist metrics. But like you alluded, I mean, we are using this for testing too, and it's been super helpful in that regard. And I would love to talk a little bit, just about the testing side of things, and how how y'all are integrating some of that into the software. And if you even guess that that would be a thing that you would have to integrate in the software when you started out. Maybe we
No,
start there.
not
Did
at
you ever
all.
think you would be working with testing practices?
I don't even think it dawned on us to start because I just don't do testing. It's not part of my world. And I also didn't really know that so many big practices have testing as a component. So
Mm.
I always, the people I refer to, at least around me, who do testing are just solo practitioners. So for whatever reason, it just wasn't in my wheelhouse. And it really came about. I think you weren't the first practice that had it. There's a practice in Texas that was very early on with us who did bring that up. And we thought, oh gosh, what is this going to entail? This is a fun challenge. So we're still trying to refine it, and figure out how to continue to add things that will be really useful specifically for testing folks. But now we have a lot of practices who are also doing testing, and they do, a lot of them have therapists and testing psychologists on their teams. But I think counting the units has been really helpful. Like we said, there's no other software that's telling you in a simple way, this is how many units you've had, and displaying that for you. So just in the time saving and the efficiency, that alone, I think is a big useful part of it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just want to double click on that. That's a problem that we've had. I mean, since we started, is getting some kind of accurate count of how many units people are billing on their evaluations. Like we have an idea of what they're supposed to be billing and what the
Right.
average should be and so forth. But it was always really tough. Like I said, it's this cumbersome spreadsheet exporting, counting manually kind of thing. And now it just appears in our Practice
Right.
Vital
Right.
dashboard, which is
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. And I will say, I mean, the only other place I know that really compiles data for you in terms of session counts or anything is Green Oak. And I know that they
Mm.
don't scale their sessions in terms of what you give credit to your clinicians for, even outside of testing. And so we've scaled the data. Each CPT code is whatever number weighted that you want to give it.
Hmm.
So if your 90791s, you give someone 1.2 hours of credit, or your 90832 is zero point 0.5 typically. I think that's been really useful to people to have that accurate number about their weekly sessions without having to count all that up themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, we were celebrating when we found out that y'all could do, because we work with half-hour units.
Yeah.
Every single evaluation we do, there's a significant portion that's a half hour, that are half-hour units. And when y'all came back and were like, "Oh yeah, we can do that," it's like, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible!" To actually finally get like an accurate picture of all the,
Yeah.
the units that we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being a practice owner is just so hard. And I think that's a big part of our whole mission here is to make things easier on practice owners. I think it's just a really hard time to be a practice owner, and we're competing against all kinds of other, the better helps out there, all the people going into solo practice. And I really believe in the group practice model and the ability. I think we're better and stronger clinicians if we're part of a team and part of a group. And I want to see us survive. But I think a lot of people are going off into solo practice, or a lot of practices are closing their doors at this point because they just have not been able to make it work with the amount of workload that's involved in being a practice owner.
Yes.
So, a big part of our mission here is to just make things easier, make it more efficient, make it easier to digest the data, and take that part of it off of your plate so you know how you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. I'm sure y'all have run into this, but talk about this a lot. Just the skill set for being a leader or a practice owner is way different than being a psychologist or clinician. And we get stuck a lot, at least, I have, and a lot of people we talk to, and being nice, right? And assuming people are doing what they're supposed to do. And the data makes it really clear whether folks are reaching their goals or not, or if we even have goals. I mean, I would imagine, yeah, I don't know. You tell me, like, if that's a part of this process for y'all, as you're onboarding people, like, are you finding that some practice owners don't even really have their minds wrapped around the concept of goals each week, or like what should their clinicians be doing, like what am I even supposed to be measuring here, that kind of thing.
100%. I think, I mean, to go back to myself, I was trying to be the flexible practice owner for a long time, and I
Oh
was
yeah.
surprised. It's actually pretty ironic because now I'm checking the productivity of clinicians all over the country, and yet I had no productivity standard within my own practice
Sure.
until about a year ago. I just thought, everyone will get their jobs done and we'll make it work. But I didn't know if we were really making ends meet at that point. Um, and so I was trying to be really flexible. And what I found out is people actually want accountability. People want to know how they're doing. I had an exit interview with one clinician and I was shocked because this was the first I was hearing of it. But she gave me the feedback that she wanted more feedback throughout her whole time
Mm,
working with me. She's like, I wanted to know if I was doing well, if I was hitting expectations, if you thought I was doing well. And honestly, I had a feeling that she was a good clinician, but I really didn't know. And I think that's what makes our job so tricky is we're behind closed doors. You get a sense, you have a sense, but you're not in the sessions with people and you don't really know how things are. So, I think that we need this data in order to know. So I think that being the flexible practice owner who doesn't have the goals in mind or the standards is not always what people need and what is going to obviously make the practice thrive in general.
sure, sure. Do you find that you're working with many solo practitioners, or is it primarily groups?
Just groups at this time, just given
Yeah.
the nature of that comparative component within the tool, we don't yet have the same level of value for a solo practice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I just wondered about that. I mean, you mentioned the coaching and accountability components earlier, and how that's kind of built into the process. I mean, can you speak to maybe themes is the right word? Themes that are coming up in these calls with folks, areas that a lot of practice owners seem to struggle or, need the most support, kind of anything in that ballpark, like for folks who are listening and they're thinking, oh gosh, like accountability sounds great. I'd love to be tracking more hours. I just don't know how or where to start. Anything in that ballpark, I think might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a number of key themes that we're seeing. I think a lot of it depends on the practice size. We're finding that, really large practices, we have some practices that are 60 and above clinicians, they have different goals in mind and different needs for this data than the practice of five. And we do have practices of five and several of 10 to 20 and 20 to 30. So I think a lot of it depends. But one thing we've encouraged people to do is to ask their clinicians to set goals based on the data that they're seeing. So if they're having a conversation with their clinicians, share the data and then have them set a goal of their own based on the data, and then check in 3 months later or 1 month later and see how they're moving or progressing toward that goal. And I think that's really empowering for the clinician too. And it's also a lot more how we want to manage as clinicians. I think just asking for feedback and not just telling people this is your next goal. So I think that's one way that a lot of people are starting to use it.
I think there's also to build on that a degree of accountability we're empowering the clinicians to take in their own caseloads, right? So, when you start to look at, how many active clients you have on a, 60-day basis, what their rebooking rate looks like and what their cancel rate looks like. When you sort of see those numbers side by side, you get to tell a really interesting story together on, okay, where are we maybe struggling, or where do we need to lean in and have specific strategic conversations for where you can re-engage your clients or have a bit more thorough communication track back and forth to get them, coming in or following through on certain things. So I think that accountability, but also empowering them to make really specific communication decisions with their roster of clients can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. And just to bring it back to the testing realm as well, simply I mean, having some sense of the work that we are doing, I think is so important. And just the, the investment, the time that we're spending, and all the hours that we're putting in that may not get accounted for, I think can be really, really telling for us as well. So it's just that meta process, I think, of being aware of what we're doing and knowing that we actually have to track it. Right. I work with a lot of testing practice owners who are like, I don't know how many evals I did last month or last year. I don't know what my target is. I don't know why I should be thinking about this, So anyway,
Right.
I love that.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're all facing so many similar challenges, kind of to your earlier question, like hiring the right people. And how do I know that I am hiring the right people for my practice? Someone can interview really well, and they're not somebody who can really retain clients. And how do I compensate my clinicians? How do I make a plan around that? What kinds of information do I use in a performance improvement plan?
Sure.
All of those things we can solve those things, using this data.
Yeah. 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 I did want to go back to one thing you said that made me think. You mentioned that it can help guide hiring decisions or knowing when to hire. Is that right? And if so, I'm curious how you are predicting that from the data that you have.
Yeah, I think when you start to, again, tell that story of how many clinicians are meeting or exceeding their weekly session goals, you start to see that utilization number come to life, and how much you're either, overbooking and potentially burning out certain clinicians that are far exceeding what they're setting out to do, or maybe, just taking on more than you even realized, as opposed to where, on the other side of the spectrum, there's oftentimes clinicians not taking on as many. And I think that starts to help you make a more informed decision of, are we at full capacity as a group? Can we continue to take on more clients in the team that we have currently? Or are we really ready to look at the finances and see if we can afford to bring on another clinician, because our team is really strapped and full, and we need to protect that sense of, burnout and preserve people's times in a way that we're not taking advantage of, and making sure that we're hiring at a time when we feel like it's not just right for the team, on a emotional level and burnout level, but also financially, can we make that choice when we start to compare it against our bigger picture, right?
Sure. Have you run into any? Sorry, go ahead, Tori.
I was just going to say, if your newest clinician is at 70% of capacity, or their utilization is at 70% of their capacity, then that's when we would recommend that you take on the next hire. It's kind of a benchmark. Yeah.
It's great. Love benchmarks. Yeah. I wanted to pivot actually to the data visualization, because this is really interesting to me, and I think is super interesting to our audience, because as testing folks, we are often trying to find ways to visualize data in a legible, sort of understandable yet beautiful way. And y'all seem to have captured that with the session data that we've been talking about. So I'm just curious, maybe this is, for you, Madeline, like that process you went through to figure out, how do we visualize this data? Like, what are the principles that we're utilizing here? Even in, we can go as granular as you want, as far as like colors or shapes or font. I mean, I'm so curious about the data visualization process and how you settled on the ultimate design.
Oh, I love that question. That's great. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a practice owner. I come from a world of design and marketing, but really one of my truest mantras in my career has been, the power of making sense of a mess. And that can apply to any industry in any field. And I think certain fundamental design principles allow you to make sense of mess, whether that's in software, whether that's in any industry, really. And I think simple color palettes and intuitive color palettes help with that. Same with font that's visually interesting and appealing and legible and readable. Pairing those together with numbers in a way that tells stories, right? And I think that's part of what I've tried to bring in partnership with Tom, our engineer, is the way you tell that story with numbers that feels accessible, approachable, digestible in a way that's not going to overwhelm or turn off, but also give you that invitation to lean in and learn more. So in our tool, really we use red, yellow, green quite a bit as just that very fundamental, intuitive, instant barometer for meeting, exceeding, or falling short of a certain threshold or benchmark. And that's the starting point. So we hope that you can kind of go into our tool and at first blush, really get a quick sense of like, oh, wow, this person's thriving. They got a lot of green going on in their quick card here. This person, maybe let me dissect this a bit. They've got some red and yellow. Okay, I got to lean in there. That should be the starting point, is as simple as that, right? And then visually, I think, there's certain primary colors and shapes that I think just mean certain things to people always. So using the dial or the circle as a means of showing progress towards a whole is, again, just something that's pretty universally understood and can be that bridge to understanding numbers in a way that maybe isn't always intuitive for some people.
Yeah. 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 I love that. I love that. I mean, one of the things that jumps out is, the red, yellow, green is super intuitive, right? And I've seen it done in ways that where it's, I don't know if it's too bright or what, but it's a little muted in y'all's software, like more of a, I don't know, I'm saying the wrong thing, but like earth tone almost, but it's muted. And that goes a long way toward lessening the harshness, I suppose.
Totally. Yeah. We played around with some different color palettes, and very quickly red, yellow, green could be too intimidating or aggressive, right? And, how do you humanize it a bit or bring it a little bit of an organic feel when numbers can be so inorganic, right? And I think part of our choices was to add a little bit of that approachability with colors that aren't too electric or, polarizing, if you will. I think like that. I'm a visual person, and it can be very subtle, but I think some of those choices were very intentional.
Yes, yes. Well, and you use the word intimidating. That triggered the previous question that I forgot, which is how folks have responded. Like, have you run into any either practice owners or, I guess, clinicians communicating through their practice owners that they are intimidated by this whole measurement data setup, where it's almost like somebody's now watching over them? Have you run into any of that?
It's been really interesting to hear. So one specific feature that we added after, we originally launched the current version of this product, one specific feature was the download feature, and being able to download the cards of each clinician to then more easily share them out to your team, right? And what was so interesting was so many clinicians were really, or so many customers were really eager for that feature. And then there was always that like second comment that was like, ooh, but am I going to upset people? Or is this going to be, culturally hard for us to adapt to? And I think very quickly we were able to help and kind of work through that with customers to show how data can be a great neutralizer in otherwise very emotionally charged conversations from a coaching standpoint, where by grounding a conversation in this data, you can actually, bring down the assumptions or the hunches or the things that you're just operating on gut instinct, right? Instead, say, here's the reality. Let's start here and then have a really meaningful conversation around it. And I think that's been something that some customers have found a little bit worrisome, but we're very quick to see the value in long term for bringing this in culturally to their organization and doing it in a way that actually can really benefit people's understanding and transparency rather than feeling intimidating, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
I'll piggyback off that a little bit. I think every single practice owner that I've met with has mentioned the fear of sort of initially sharing this with their team. How is this going to come across? Is it going to feel punitive? I want to retain my employees. I want them to feel good about their jobs. And so again, I think a lot of it's about coaching clinicians to not be so afraid of data and to let them know that this is a win-win-win for the practice overall. It's a win for the practice manager who can more clearly, easily pull information. It's a win for the clinician because they can be empowered to make changes. They can also track their own data against their own goals. They can know how they're doing as a therapist and whether their clients are meeting the outcomes that they want them to meet. If they're not retaining clients, then their clients aren't succeeding. And I think any clinician would probably say, I want that. I want my clients to succeed. So we need data to know whether that's happening. And then, of course, it's a win for the practice owner to be able to get those holistic, a holistic picture of what's happening. So, and the client wins too, because then we're tracking whether or not they're meeting what they came in to meet to treatment for.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm right. I'm on board with everything you're saying. It's that makes me think of that phrase, what gets measured gets managed. Right. And if we're
Yeah.
not measuring, then what are we really doing? I don't know. As practice owners, what are we working toward? What are our clinicians working toward? Yeah. Those guidelines and guardrails and concrete goals just help everyone, I think.
Right, right. It can just be a framework. So you have a data point to start with in your supervision. Otherwise in the past, I would just show up and say, hey, do you have anything you want to work on today? And they'd maybe bring a case that we'd talk about, sometimes not even. But this way we can say, like, hey, it looks like the cancellations have gotten higher. Do you have a sense of what's going on? And then let's talk through that. Or if your churn rate is kind of high, the first thing I want to look at is whether or not we're matching the right clients with you. And maybe the clients that we've been giving you are out of your skill set or not your area of expertise, or the clients that you even enjoy working with as much. And so if they're not sticking around, let's make changes based on that information. And that's so useful for clinicians too, and preventing their burnout, making them feel more satisfied in their work and feeling, we don't feel good if we're losing clients all the time.
Of course not. Of course not. Yeah. And I love what y'all said a little bit earlier, just about using it to gauge clinician burnout and making sure, because we have some really high performers too, who are
Mhm.
consistently over their hours. And,
Right.
it just gives a data point to check in and say, like, hey, you've been doing a lot of hours. Are you doing okay? And do we need to dial this back? And again, just more of a window into how people are doing, which I
Exactly.
love.
Yeah, you can offer support and you can also offer accolades. And I think we don't get a
Mhm.
lot of that, like kudos in our field, saying like, "Hey, your retention rate's going up. What kind of changes have you been making? Are you aware
Yeah,
of anything you're doing differently with your clients?" It's really great, and being able to kind of acknowledge those things that people are doing well.
absolutely. Well, I know we've talked about many things, lots of different aspects of this whole business, but I wonder if you have some idea, anything you can share around what's next, what you're shooting for, targets, future.
Sure, sure. I'll speak to it maybe more in the immediate sense. We're actually currently going through a round of focus groups, talking to various customers about their experience with the product and trying to learn as much as we can about pain points, problems, opportunity areas, things people love and want to see more of. So we're working on the next iteration of the product, growing it a bit, offering a bit more depth and breadth in terms of core metrics and how you can delve into those, as well as areas that can be more easily and readily adjusted on your end to change, the session goals and start dates and whatnot on your own. So we're tinkering with the product in a way that we think is going to really be informed by our customer feedback and propelled to that next level of value for customers. I won't speak more specifically because we're still collecting information, but we hope to really continue to build ourselves out as that practice owners companion, right? As their software companion that can serve many needs, but really be their um, source of confidence and comfort in understanding just the health of their practice and the health of their clinicians' performance on a regular basis. So that's at the core of what we're doing, and we think we have a long roadmap to continue to do that and blow that out further and further. And we're continuing to learn about the industry needs as we go. And it's a broad spectrum of players involved in this landscape right now, and obviously technology is influencing this industry as it is influencing our whole society right now in major ways. And I think to be a small part of that, hopefully for the better for practice owners, specifically, group practice owners, is really special for us to be a part of right now.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Well, I'm excited to see where y'all go. Yeah, if this is where we're at, less than a year in, there's a lot of opportunity out there. It's really exciting to think about where it might end up. So thank you all for coming on. This is fantastic. Thanks for talking through, talking about your family, your business, and what you've learned from practices. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a lot of fun. Thanks.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jeremy. Dr. Jeremy.
That's a good note to end on. You hear that, everybody? Dr. Jeremy. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Always grateful to have you here. I hope that you take away some information that you can implement in your practice and in your life. Any resources that we mentioned during the episode will be listed in the show notes, so make sure to check those out. If you like what you hear on the podcast, I would be so grateful if you left a review on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're a practice owner or aspiring practice owner, I'd invite you to check out the Testing Psychologist Mastermind groups. I have mastermind groups at every stage of practice development, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. We have homework, we have accountability, we have support, we have resources. These groups are amazing. We do a lot of work and a lot of connecting. If that sounds interesting to you, you can check out the details at thetestingpsychologist.com/consulting. You can sign up for a pre-group phone call and we will chat and figure out if a group could be a good fit for you. Thanks so much. The information contained in this podcast and on the Testing Psychologist website are intended for informational and educational purposes only. Nothing in this podcast or on the website is intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please note that no doctor-patient relationship is formed here, and similarly, no supervisory or consultative relationship is formed between the host or guests of this podcast and listeners of this podcast. If you need the qualified advice of any mental health practitioner or medical provider, please seek one in your area. Similarly, if you need supervision on clinical matters, please find a supervisor with an expertise that fits your needs.